the scale of what needs to be achieved, and how the nature of challenges from when you began to what now has changed.
Okay, thank you, Mridula. Look, I think the scale of the challenge is simply enormous. I think there's no other way to sugarcoat it. We've developed as humanity a, a fossil fuel economy over the last 250 years. Okay, it's taken us, all of us working together to create an economy that is based on taking stuff out of the ground, a whole system of user industries that are dependent, whether it's planes, whether it's cars, whether it's ships, whether it is how we power our homes. All of those has been based on the fossil fuel economy, right? And now we have this task of having to change this in a matter of literally the next 20, 30 years. And just uprooting everything and having a much more electric economy, and making sure that that electric economy or that electricity is generated through clean sources, right? So it's a pretty enormous challenge. But therein also lies the opportunity for people like us, certainly, because obviously it does mean that there's a lot of work that has to happen, a lot of capital that has to go in, and a lot of business opportunities as well, right? And I'm pretty convinced that given the scale of the challenge, you cannot solve it if it is not commercially attractive. Otherwise, capital just will not go into the sector. Now, you asked me the question of what has changed over the last, let's say, 13, 15 years that I've been in this sector. I think a lot has changed, and there's therefore a lot of scope for and room for us to be optimistic about the future. 15 years ago, climate change was something that people were just beginning to imagine and start thinking about, okay? Today, I think it's front and center, where you have, whenever you have the COP meetings and so on, you obviously have a much higher sense of understanding of this problem globally. And you know what heartens me is that if you look at this room full of people here, actually it's not a room, of course, the tent full of people here, you'll find that most of them are, I would say, at least 20 years younger in average age than people sitting in other tents in other parts of this festival, right? And that gives me room for optimism that young people today are getting a lot more engaged with this problem than they were earlier. And that, it's in some ways representative of civil society in general being a lot more concerned about this issue. So I think that's in some ways point number one. The second thing is, the second big change that I've seen happen is that technology has moved dramatically over this time period. And it's got to a point now where, at least as far as the electricity part of the energy value chain is concerned, the technology solutions are becoming visible. We just now need to implement them at massive scale, which is a task by itself, but at least we know what the solutions are, and we have to now implement, right? The third thing that is beginning to happen is that electricity represents only a quarter of all carbon emissions, or a quarter of the energy carbon emissions, okay? The rest of it comes from other areas of energy consumption, whether it's heating or mobility or other such areas, heat pumps, etc., right? And so all of that, I think now we are realizing that those problems also have to be solved with a high degree of urgency. Otherwise, we will not be able to meet the carbon budget requirement that we have to stay within. And I think there's a lot of work that is now going on in those areas also. And therefore, there is, I think, at least I'm optimistic, that we will be able to find some of those solutions in the next 10 to 20 years. And then we'll, of course, have to implement at scale. The problem that we all have is that we don't have time. So even 10 to 20 years, while it doesn't seem like it's going to be that long, unfortunately is, as you said, too long for us, because we've already now crossed the 1.5 degrees centigrade threshold, right? We all know that. We are sort of heading, if you just look at the pledges that countries have made, we are looking at anywhere from 2.5 to 3 degrees centigrade. And mind you, these are only pledges, right? And the action is still much further behind. And so I think the third kind of change that I see happening is that the energy transition now has become mainstream. Earlier when I started, it was a kind of a niche sector, a few companies were playing in it or getting involved in it. But now you find that everybody now recognizes that this is the next big economic opportunity or business opportunity. And so you see a lot of people coming into the sector. And that is really good because you need all hands on deck. You need everybody to be coming in with their capital, with their execution ability to solve these problems. And I think that is really very, very positive. So when I started, we were very few of us who were doing this. Today, I think there are many more people who are doing this, and that's great. It obviously means more competition for us, but I think it's good for humanity. And there are many more people now seized of the problem who are hopefully going to get into this sector over a period of time and help solve this problem, whether it's from technology or implementation or just creating the pressure on civil society, whether it's politicians or policy wonks or whatever, or people like me, to make the change happen a lot faster.